Part 2 of Witch of the Demon Seas by Poul Anderson. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Part 2. The cell was no longer than a man's height, a dripping cave hewed out of the rock under the palace foundations. Corrun crouched on the streaming floor in utter darkness. The chains, which they had locked to ring bolts in the wall, clashed when he stirred. And this was how it ended, he thought bitterly. The wild career of the exiled conqueror, the heave and surge of ships under the running waves, the laughter of comrades and the clamor of swords and the thrum of wind in the rigging, had come to this. One man, hunched in a loneliness and darkness like a colder womb, waiting in timeless murk for the day when they would drag him out to be torn by beasts for the amusement of fools. They fed him at intervals, a slave bringing a bowl of prison swill, while a spear-armed guard stood well out of reach and watched. Otherwise, he was alone. He could not even hear the voices of other captives. There was only the slow dripping of water and the harsh tones of iron links. The cell must lie below even the regular dungeons, far down in the very bowels of the island. Vague images floated across his mind. The high cliffs about Eleontis Bay, the great flowers blooming with sullen fires in the jungle beyond the beach, the slim black corsair galleys at anchor. He remembered the open sky, the eternally clouded sky under which blew the long wet winds, out of which spilled rain and lightning and grew the eerie blue of dusk. He had often wondered what lay beyond those upper clouds. Now and then, he remembered, one could see the vague disk of the heaven fire, and he had heard of times when incredibly violent storms opened the brief rift in the high cloud layers to let through a shaft of searing brilliance, at whose touch water boiled and the earth burst into flame. It made him think of the speculations of Connacher's philosophers, that the world was really a globe around which the heaven fire swung, bringing day and night. Some had gone so far as to imagine that it was the world which did the moving, that the heaven fire was a ball of flame in the middle of creation about which all other things revolved. But Connacher was in chains now, he remembered. Its folks bowed to the will of Akera's greedy proconsuls, its art and philosophy the idle playthings of the conquerors. The younger generation was growing up with an idea that it might be best to yield, to become absorbed into the thalassocracy, and so eventually gain equal status with the Akerans. But Corrun could not forget the great flames flapping against a wind-torn night sky, the struggling forms at ropes' ends swaying from trees, the long lines of chained people stumbling hopelessly to the slave galleys under Akeran lashes. Perhaps he had carried the grudge too long. No, by Brannock Branner, there had been a family which was no longer. That was grudge enough for a lifetime. A lifetime, he thought sardonically, which wouldn't be very much protracted now. He sighed wearily in the stinking gloom of the cell. There were too many memories crowding in. The outlaw years had been hard and desperate, but they'd been good ones, too. There had been song and laughter and comradeship, and gigantic deeds over an endless waste of waters. The long blue hush of twilight, the soft black nights, the gray days with the sea running gray and green and gold under the squalls of rain, the storms roaring and raging, the eager leap of a ship, frenzy of battle at the taking of town or galley, death so close one could almost hear the beat of black wings, orgy of loot and vengeance, the pirate town, grass huts under jungle trees, stuffed with treasure, full of brawling, bawdy life, the scar-faced, swaggering men and the lusty, insolent women, ruddy firelight hammering back the night, while the surf thundered endlessly along the beach. Well, all things come to a close. And while he would have wished a different sort of death for himself, he didn't have long to wait in this misery. Something stirred far down the narrow corridor, and he caught the flickering glow of a torch. Scowling, he stood up, stooped under the low ceiling. Who in all the hells was this? It was too soon for feeding, unless his time sense had gone completely awry, and he didn't think the games could have been prepared in the few days since his arrival. They came up to the entrance of the cell and stood looking in by the guttering red torchlight. A snarl twisted Corun's lips. Shorzon and Caresis. Of all the scum of Akara, he growled, I had to be inflicted with you. This is no time for insolence, said the sorcerer coldly. He lifted the torch higher. The red light threw his face into blood-splashed shadow. His eyes were pits of darkness in which smoldered two embers. His black robe blended with the surrounding shadow. His face and hands seemed to float disembodied in the dank air. Corun's eyes traveled to Caresis, and in spite of the hate that burned in him, he had to admit she was perhaps the loveliest woman he had ever seen. Tall and slim and lithe, moving with the soundless grace of a Sanduvian Pharax, the dark hair sheening down past the chill sculptured beauty of her marble-white face, she returned his blue stare with eyes of dark flame. She was dressed as if for action, a brief tunic that left arms and legs bare, a short black cloak and high buskins, but jewels still blazed at throat and wrists. Behind her padded a lean shadow, at sight of which Corun stiffened. He had heard of Caresis's tame Irene. Folk said the devil beast had found a harder heart in the witch's breast and yielded to her. Some said less mentionable things. The slitted green eyes flared at Corun, and the cruel muzzle opened in a fanged yawn. Back, Piraeus, said Caresis evenly. Her voice was low and sweet, almost a caress. It seemed strange that such a voice had spoken the rituals of black sorcery and ordered the flaying alive of 1,000 helpless Isarian prisoners and counseled some of the darkest intrigues in Akara's bloody history. She said to Corun, This is a fine end for all your noble thoughts, man of Konohor. At least, he answered, you credit me with having had them, which is more than I'd say of you. The red lips curved in a cynical smile. Human purposes have a habit of ending this way. The mighty warrior, the scourge of the seas, ends in a foul prison cell waiting for an unimaginative death. The old epics lied, didn't they? Life isn't quite the glorious adventure that fools think it to be. It could be if it weren't for your sort, wearily. Go away, won't you? If you won't even let me talk with my old comrades, you can at least spare me your own company. We are here with a definite purpose, said Shorzon. We offer you life, freedom, and the liberation of Konohor. He shook his tawny head. It isn't even funny. No, I mean it, said Caresis earnestly. Shorzon had you put in here alone, not out of malice, but simply to make this private talk possible. You can help us with a project so immeasurably greater than your petty quarrels that anything you can ask in return will be as nothing. And you are the one man who can do so. I tell you this so that, realizing you have some kind of bargaining position, you will meet us as equal to equal, not as prisoner to captor. If you agree to aid us, you will be released this instant. With a sudden flame within him, Corun tautened his huge body. Oh gods! Oh almighty gods beyond the clouds! If it were true! His voice shook. What do you want? Your help in a desperate venture, said Caresis. I tell you frankly that we may well all die in it, but at least you will die as a free man, and if we succeed, all the world may be ours. "What is it?" he asked hoarsely. "I cannot tell you everything now," said Shorzon, "but the story has long been current that you once sailed to the lairs of the Xanthi, the sea demons, and returned alive. Is it true?" "Aye." Corrun stiffened, with sudden alarm trembling in his nerves. "Aye, by great luck I came back. But they are not a race for humans to traffic with." "I think the powers I can summon will match theirs," said Shorzon. "We want you to guide us to their dwellings and teach us the language on the way, as well as whatever else you know about them. When we return, you may go where you choose, and if we get their help, we will be able to set Konahar free soon afterward." Corrun shook his head. "It's nothing good that you plan," he said slowly. "No one would approach the Xanthi for any good purpose." "You didn't you?" chuckled the wizard dryly. "If you want the truth, we are after their help in seizing the government of Akera, as well as certain knowledge they have." "If you succeed," argued Corrun stubbornly, "why should you then let Konahar go?" "Because power over Akera is only a step to something too far beyond the petty goals of empire for you to imagine," said Shorzon bleakly. "You must decide now, man. If you refuse, you die." Paresis moved one slim hand, and the Irene padded forward on razor-clawed feet. The leather wings were folded back against the long black body. The barbed tail lashed hungrily, and a snarl vibrated in the lean throat. "If you say no," came the woman's sweet voice, "Pareus will rip your guts out. That will at least afford us an amusing spectacle for our trouble." Then she smiled, the dazzling smile which had driven men to their doom ere this. "But if you say yes," she whispered, "a destiny awaits for you that kings would envy. You are a strong man, Corrun. I like strong men." The corsair looked into the warm, dark light of her eyes and back to the icy glare of the devil beast. No unarmed man had ever survived the onslaught of an Irene, and he was chained. At thought of returning to the dark home of the Xanthi, he shuddered. But life was still wondrous sweet, and, once free to move about, he might still have some chance of escape or even of overpowering them. Or, who knew? He wondered, with a brief giddiness, if the dark witch before him could be as evil as her enemies said. Strong and ruthless, yes, but so was he. When he learned the full truth about her soaring plans, he might even decide they were right. In any case, to live, to die if he must, under the sky. "I'll go," he said hoarsely. "I'll go with you." The low, exultant laughter of Paresis sang in the flare-lit gloom. Shorzon came up and took a key from his belt. For a bare moment the thought of snapping that skinny neck raged through Corrun's mind. The magician smiled grimly. "Don't try it," he said. "As a small proof of what we can do." Suddenly he was not there. It was a monster from the jungles of Umlotu, standing in the cell with Corrun, a scaled beast that hissed at him with grinning jaws and spewed poison on the floor. "Sorcery!" Corrun shrank back, a chill of fear striking even his steely heart. Shorzon resumed human shape and wordlessly unlocked the chains. They fell away, and Corrun stumbled out into the corridor. The Irene snarled and slipped closer. Paresis laid a hand on the beast's head, checking that gliding rush as if with a leash. Her smile and the faint, sweet scent of her hair were dizzying. "Come," she said. One hand slipped between his own fingers, and the cool touch seemed to burn him. Shorzon led the way down a long, sloping tunnel where only the streaming torch flames had life. Their footsteps echoed hollowly in the wet, black length of it. "We go at once," he said. "When Croman learns of your escape, all Taurus will be after us. But it will be too late then. We sail swiftly tonight." "Sail? Whither? What of my men?" asked Corrun. "They're lost, I'm afraid, unless Croman spares them until we get back," said Croesus. "But we saved you. I'm glad of that." A faint smell of fresh, salty air blew up the tunnel. It must open on the sea, thought Corrun. He wondered how many passages riddled the depth under Taros. They came out finally on a narrow beach under the looming western cliffs. The precipices climbed into the utter dark of night, reaching into the unseen sky. Before them lay open sea, swirling with phosphorescence. Corrun drew deep lungfuls of air. Salt and seaweed and wet wild wind, sand under his feet, sky overhead, a woman beside him. By the gods, it was good to be alive. A galley was moored against a tiny pier. By the light of bobbing torches, Corrun's mariner's eye surveyed her. She was built along the same lines as his own ship. A lean black vessel with one square sail, open-decked save at stem and stern, rowers' benches lining the sides with a catwalk running between. There would be quarters for the men under the poop and forecastle decks, supplies in the hold beneath. A cabin was erected near the waist, apparently for officers, and there was a ballista mounted in the bows. Otherwise, no superstructure. A carved sea monster reared up for figurehead, and the stern post carved back to make its tail. He read the name on the bows, Brasea. Strange that dark vessel should bear a girl's name. About a 50-man capacity, he judged, and she would be fast. The crew were getting aboard. They must have come down the cliffs along some narrow trail. They were all Umlotuan blues, he noticed. A cutthroat gang if ever he saw one, but silent and well-disciplined. It was shrewd to take only the mercenary warriors along. They had no patriotic interest in what happened to Akera, and their reckless courage was legendary. A burly, one-eyed officer came up and saluted. "All set, sir," he reported. "Good," nodded Shorzon. "Captain Imozu, this is our guide, Captain Corrun." "The raider, eh?" Imozu chuckled and shook hands in the manner of the barbarians. "Well, we could hardly have a better one, I'm sure. Glad to know you, Corrun." The pirate murmured polite phrases, but he decided that Imozu was a likable chap, and wondered what had led him to take service under anyone with Shorzon's reputation. They went aboard. "The Sea of Demons lies due north," said Shorzon. "Is that the right way to sail?" "For the time being," nodded Corrun. "When we get closer, I'll be able to tell you more exactly." "Then you might as well wash and rest," said Croesus. "You need both." Her smile was soft in the flickering red light. Corrun entered the cabin. It was divided into 3 compartments. Apparently Imozu slept with his men, or perhaps on deck, as many men preferred. His own tiny room was clean, sparsely furnished, with a bunk and a washbowl. He cleaned himself eagerly and put on the fresh tunic laid out for him. When he came back on deck, the ship was already under way. A strong south wind was blowing, filling the dark sail, and the Brasea surged forward under its thrust. The phosphorescence shone around her hull and out of the rolling waters. Behind, the land faded into the night. He'd certainly been given no chance to escape, he thought. Barring miracles, he had to go through with it now, at least until they reached the Sea of Demons, after which anything might happen. He shivered a little, wondering darkly whether he had done right, wondering what their mission was and what the world's fate was to be as a result of it. Croesus slipped quietly up to stand beside him. The Irene crouched down nearby, his baleful eyes never leaving the man. "Outward bound," she said, and laughter was gay in her voice. He said nothing, but stared ahead into the night. "You'd better sleep, Karun," she said. "You're tired now, and you'll need all your strength later." She laid a hand on his arm and laughed aloud. "It will be an interesting voyage, to say the least." Rather, he thought with wry humor. It occurred to him that the trip might even have its pleasant aspects. "Good night, Karun," she said, and left him. Presently he went back to his room. Sleep was long in coming, and uneasy when it did arrive. End of Part 2.